Hi, my name is Naomi. I was the director of the Starfish foster home from March 2012 to September 2013. And I am here today to talk about what really happened with the Meeker versus Starfish lawsuit. I wanted to start off with a disclaimer that the Meekers have no idea that I am doing this. And it is not just their story. It's also my story. That's me behind the thanks sign. I've been in China since 2004, and my entire time in China, I've been working with orphaned or vulnerable children, special needs education, and getting kids surgery. I've known Amanda since 2007. So when Amanda fell ill in 2012, I quit my job and I moved to Xi'an to take over the Starfish foster home. Now, I hate the idea of getting on the hamster wheel of self-defense, but because of the internet and because of the amount of slander against me and also the personal cost of this lawsuit, I feel that it's important that I put out there a concise response, a concise my side of the story. So here it is. The story is that there was a little girl, Caitlin. She was Caitlin when she was at Starfish, and she was renamed Carrie's after she was adopted. She had been adopted by a family from Dallas, the Meeker family. And when they got her home, they had realized that her special needs were much greater than what they had expected. So they ended up suing Starfish for fraud. Now, I know at first bounce, the idea of suing a charity is horrific, but I would ask that you would please listen to the story, and I hope that you will get a different perspective and understand that this was actually a very necessary lawsuit. Now, in the past few years, I've talked with a lot of families who've adopted children who really should have never been adopted. Children who are rapists, arsonists, pedophiles, where their age had been lied about, and just all these problems that come out of this. Somebody who's adopted a special needs child, to find out that not only do they have a special need, but their IQ is so low that they're never going to be able to live independently. And these are all needs that were known before the adoption. And this puts a burden on the family that the family simply cannot bear. And there are a lot of marriages that are broken up over this, and relationships with the other children that are just destroyed. And there's no excuse for deception in international adoption. Amanda would have been horrified if she had known that this is how Starfish went down. Amanda was a bluntly honest person. There were also maybe 7 families who had approached Amanda about adopting Caitlin, and Amanda had talked all of them out of it because she felt that Caitlin was just simply unadoptable. But adopted she was. Now, the lawsuit was settled last year out of court in 2019, gone pretty far through the process before it was settled, and it was settled in the Meeker's favor for something. I have no idea what the terms were for the settlement. But the crux of the settlement is that Starfish had lied. Now, they had lied a lot about just about everything, but they had lied about not having the medical information and not trying to cover up, what Caitlin's true condition was. Now, because the process had gone pretty far, it had gone through discovery, and in discovery, they go through each communication and each document. And there is at one point where you have to verify everything, and all the documents were verified. And I want to be really clear on this. So in public, Starfish was strongly and loudly and repeatedly denied having any medical records or any wrongdoing. But when they were in private and they're surrounded by lawyers and their feet are to the fire, they acknowledged, yes, they had received everything. So they had, the lie, they lied very knowingly that they didn't have this information. They knew this. They absolutely knew that they were telling a lie. And attached in the emails that they claimed that they had never had publicly were 5 opinions from brain specialists, 2 EEGs, MRIs, CAT scans, brain scans, dental reports, full physical therapy report, full speech therapy report, and videos of epileptic seizures. These were all received. All of the medical information had been translated in English when it was passed on to the Starfish board. None of these files were made available to the orphanage, to the agency, or were any way passed on to the Meekers. And great lengths were taken to make sure that the Meekers were kept in the dark. Now, please pardon my slightly off-topic rant concerning the Starfish property, but it's basically, it's the same lie that they had told. I was accused of just giving away the Starfish property and being reckless with it. But the reality is that I was given direct instructions by the president to liquidate items that Starfish would not be able to use at the new location. And this was very, very clear. Now the president at the time had told the board and me that it would be a direct communication between him and I, and that he would be reporting back to the board what went on. Here's the email. And I communicated with the president regularly, mostly by phone, and each step was approved. Now, when the president stepped back and the new president was elected, the new president claimed no knowledge, and basically because he wasn't, he didn't approve of everything, that that I had stolen it. Blatant lie that I had stolen it. He just wasn't the president at the time. And the consequences of this lie, this slander, and this attack on my character is something that I deal with on a daily basis. And that's really actually why I'm doing this video, is because of the personal consequences of the Starfish property. Okay, my rant's over, or this rant is over. This is Caitlin. Actually, this is Caitlin. Caitlin, when you see these photos of Caitlin, looking into the camera and being, seeming to be engaged, this means that somebody took like 50 pictures before they got a good one. Caitlin does not, she's blind, she's deaf, she doesn't engage with the outside world, and this is really more of what she looks like. Caitlin was one of the early babies at Starfish, and she came, I think she was about 6 weeks old when she arrived. And she had a very severe case of spina bifida. So the spina bifida was, it was the growth at the back of her head, and it was actually much larger than this picture. It was like the size of her head. And when they removed the growth, they removed 65% of her brain. Now, this left her with a lot of really wonky problems because every part of her brain was damaged. And I would describe her as a very hard to care for vegetable. We did, however, have this amazing nanny Jiang, who just loved Caitlin to death, and she would just hold her and sing songs to her all day long. And I discovered when, I started visiting hospices and long-term care facilities in China that they're just populated with people like this who have just a heart for these broken bodies and are just have a patience and ability to love these children that I don't have. I don't have that ability. We were very, very lucky to have Nanny John. One of the board members was able to get a special wheelchair for Caitlin. We started getting a physical therapist who would come in and work with the kids who needed physical therapy. Now, one of the board members had gotten in her head that she really wanted Caitlin to be adopted, and great. And she put me to task to get all of her medical tests updated and get her to the dentist and do all of that. And I was very happy to do all that. Now, normally the director, which would have been me, would have taken all the medical files and sent it directly to the orphanage, and then the orphanage passes it on to the agency. But I was instructed by the board member that she wanted me to send all of the medical files to the board of directors, and then the board of directors would take it to their doctors and hopefully, be able to get like a little bit more of a hopeful diagnosis. And because the board member had adopted from this particular orphanage, she said that she had a relationship with the director and that she would be responsible for passing these files on to the orphanage. And that all sounded good, and that was fine. And but as I started to know this woman better and understand her character better, I started to be suspicious that nothing was being passed on, or not everything was being passed on. And I kind of started asking questions and pushing back. And when I did that, I was getting from, the board, don't you want her to be adopted? Starfish can't be held legally liable. Don't you want her to be adopted? Starfish can't be held legally liable. And, just back and forth and back and forth. And, it was really like, why can't you get on board? Like, we can totally pull this off if you, just keep your mouth shut. And I just didn't think it was right. So like legally we could get by with it, but I didn't think that this was the right thing to do. And so I was fired. And this was actually fair because they gave me a lot of opportunity to get on board. And they really needed a different type of director, somebody who was very different than I was. But but before I was fired, I was given a really strong dressing down by a board member who told me that if I did anything that would jeopardize the adoption, that I was going to be in a world of hurt. And I'll tell you, I was actually to the point of being frightened by this. So there was this agency visit that had been leading up to, and at the time of the agency visit, first of all, I'd been fired right before the agency visit, but I still did it. Caitlin had been under my direct care, and she had been eating a healthy diet. I'd gotten her to the dentist, and her teeth were as good a shape as they were going to be at that point. She was getting 20 minutes of exercise 3 times a day. And the really big thing is I had cracked the code and figured out how to get her to sleep. She would shout through the night, and it was a big deal. And when she started to sleep well, she was really doing well. At the agency visit, both Amy and I hid our identity because we were both told to. No questions were asked and no information was offered. It was probably less than 20 minutes long, and there were no photos. There were no photos taken. It was just weird. it was a really weird visit. So after Caitlin was in my care, Starfish sent her over to a place that I'm going to call the shithole healing home. And it's a home that is very well financed, it's very pretty, and it's very, very badly managed. Let's just start with, this photo was taken in May when the weather was very hot. And these are the clothes that I had sent her in, and nobody in management realized that she's wearing winter clothes in the hot weather. That's just one thing. At this home, they took her off solid food. They stopped her daily exercises. They even got rid of her PT equipment and her PDF files that explained how the exercises went. They kept her isolated on the second floor, away from any volunteers who might be able to intervene. They stopped brushing her teeth. They ignored her epileptic tics. She laid on the floor until her hair was matted, and they did not make any of the adjustments so she could sleep. So these were my observations after she had been there for 6 months. And I was very, very worried and very concerned. And I contacted the board of directors and I said, please let me take her back because they're not taking care of her. And the response was a complete temper tantrum. Not that they weren't taking care of her, but that I had visited. The results of this is that Caitlin was unrecognizable to Amy after 18 months of regression. Her meds were way off. Her adult teeth have all been pulled, and that doesn't really matter because she's now on a feeding tube. Her muscle strength was destroyed. I think it was 3 years before she was able to sit up again. And she's bald in the back of her head. And, you know, my involvement was because of this sleep issue. I started, you'll read about this later, but because no one had told the Meekers how to get her to sleep, that was part of the problem. Now, in the meantime, while I was there and while she was in the shithole, the Meekers had been identified, as wanting to adopt Caitlin. And they were told that there was a wealthy family, this wealthy couple, who had fallen in love with Caitlin and they weren't able to adopt her. So they were anonymously donating her adoption fees. That's what the Meekers were told. However, in truth, the adoption fees came directly from Starfish. The Meekers had signed a contract that if they disrupted, they would have to repay the entire amount within a few days. And this was like, at the time of adoption, was like $30,000 US. So if they had disrupted the adoption, they would have had to have come up with $30,000 US to pay back to Starfish. Now, before the adoption, the Starfish board, one member in particular, communicated frequently with the Meekers, and like not saying they were giving updates, but just telling them lies, promising to visit after the adoption. They were going to be BFF, and they were going to braid each other's hair, and they were going to like be friends, and visit often after the adoption, and really just setting a kind of grooming the Meekers and setting a lot of post-adoption expectations. And they told them terrible things about me, to the point where the Meekers, really did not want anything to do with me because they thought I was really bad, even though I was the only person who really knew what Caitlin's situation was. Now, adoption day was in mid-April in 2015, and Amy was not there. Her husband Bob had come to adopt her and had come to pick up Caitlin. And at the time of the adoption, they were handed a bottle of medicine, but they weren't told what was in the medicine. Now, after the adoption was finalized, Starfish just went into, radio silence for months. They didn't hear anything once it was finalized. And once the medicine came, ran out, they were that's when Caitlin started to, show the self-harm, which is heartbreaking, and the shouting through the night. And they've got this child who before had just been lethargic, and now she's all of a sudden just really, really hard to care for. And surprise, Caitlin had been heavily sedated. So that's why she wasn't any problem when they were in China. And once, once the meds ran off, you're starting to see the self-harm, and Amy is emailing Starfish, and she's not getting any response at all from anybody. And finally, Amy wrote, it was like a Facebook post, and it wasn't a complaint. It just said, oh, because Carrie's isn't sleeping, I'm going to go jogging, or something like that. It wasn't a whine. But when I saw that, I just sent a quick email, offering to help, tell her how I was able to get her to sleep. Now, notice the date, July 18th. This is 4 months after the adoption. And during these months, they hadn't heard anything from the Starfish board. And once, I told her what to do, and she did it, and it worked. Amy comes back to me and she says, hey, do you have any medical files? And I'm like, yeah, I've got all the medical files. They're electronic and they're on my computer. So I just sent her all the medical files. And, just a huge dump of medical files with all the English translation and, everything that I had there. Now, finally, she hears from the Starfish president, and she's like, hey, what happened with the medical files? And the president says, oh, Naomi stole them. That's why we don't have them. Now, this infuriated me. Now, this is the same guy who threatened the crap out of me if I revealed any medical information. And I was furious. I was so angry. And I didn't want Amy to know that I had been, what my part was in this. And so I just sent her some of the communications that showed that, me arguing with the board about her medical, about the whole thing. And this is where my story ends. And it goes on with, now it becomes the Meeker story completely. I had nothing to gain out of this. And actually, if I had gone along with the lies, I would be very comfortable right now. I got nothing out of this. And I lost a lot. My opinion, and because everybody wants my opinion, there was a problem with magical thinking, that the Starfish board, wouldn't take things realistically. And this is part of the problem with, kind of adoptive parents, and they're thinking, oh, cute orphans get adopted and then they live happily ever after. And if the board had educated themselves on orphan issues and had understand HUCOs and the Tomorrow Plan and Blue Sky Plan and trends in adoption and special needs and all that, if they had educated themselves on this just simply wouldn't have happened. And this is also why the board had made so many incredibly stupid, wasteful decisions. I mean, just dumb decisions. And it was because they only saw things through a very, very narrow way. If the emphasis was on giving the child a healthy, happy life, I think the whole the whole trajectory would have been very different. And the realization that adoption isn't for all orphans. Promoting hospice and long-term care is really what needed. And if a fraction of the money was put towards hospice or long-term care, it would have really promoted, it really would have promoted this, and it would have been better for everybody. And there was also a real lack of respect for the people who adopt the hard kids. And, you know, just from the board, it was really like they talked about, you know, these people like, you know, they wear denim jumpers and they're super stupid. And that is by no means the people who adopt the hard kids. They are very bright, very compassionate people, and they deserve respect. But the board simply did not value or does not value honesty and integrity. They just don't. This is just a small fraction of the whole story. This could have been 100 hours long. But you get the general idea. Thank you. Thank you for listening.